Today we're going to be talking with Roslyn Dawson Thompson. She is president and CEO of Dawson Communications, not her first company, I will mention. She's a board member of the Tides Foundation, which we are going to be hearing more about. And she is retired CEO of the Texas Women's Foundation, where she served over 10 years, I think it was 11 years. Roslyn is a frequent and sought-after speaker on women's leadership, philanthropy, gender equity, and gender lens investing, and we're going to talk about all of those things. Last year, I was really glad to be part of the presentation at AFP Dallas National Philanthropy Day, where Roslyn received a special recognition award. Those awards are given out quite infrequently, and I was very, very happy to see you receive one last year. So thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, my friend, for nominating me. I was honored and totally thrilled by the award.
Well, you well deserved. So I want to say that when we very first met a million years ago, you had a marketing firm, Dawson Marie Teague Communications, and Verizon was one of your big clients. Yep. And I was just dabbling in doing some consulting work, and you were supportive, or Verizon was supportive of this organization called Dallas Reads.
Yes.
Dallas Reads. And so that's when we very first met. And, and you were just so patient and charming and dependable and everything that got that event off the ground that I was working on. So I remember that and will always treasure that first memory, because it was like, wow, this lady really has it together, And of course, both of us being in Dallas and not quite running in the same circles, but certainly keeping up with each other. I'm really glad to have that friendship and relationship with you. You are quite an accomplished woman. I'm going to say that again. And I want to know who your role model is or was. You've been a role model to so many, including myself.
Well, that is super kind of you, and I cherish our friendship, my friend. It's really been very special through a whole lot of wonderful work that we got to do together, and so I felt great about that, but I always feel good when I see you, so thank you. Thank you for having me. Role models, golly, there are a lot of them. I think I'll start with my folks. Mother was a child of the, pre-Depression, but she kind of suffered through the Depression insofar as she was one of 4 children, but the money that was there, which wasn't much, went to the brother so that he could go to college, despite my mother being really in line to be valedictorian of her high school class. But her junior year, they had to move, and she had to take care of the younger siblings while her mom went on the road selling cosmetics to keep the family together, and the dad had disappeared. So there was this legacy of strong women against all odds, that mother carried with her, and she was, as one of my friends called her, a proud ship, that when she sailed into the room, you knew that Melba Dawson had arrived. She was fabulous and really committed to giving back, especially to women and girls. Dad was daunting to be his daughter because he was a famed war hero who was told to have broken open the beach on Omaha Beach on D-Day and was highly decorated and written about. Very humble man, though, in that regard, is that he kept reinforcing that he wasn't the hero, it was all the fellows and the women that he served with. But he was entrepreneurial, too. He was an oil man, but he was entrepreneurial. And so I kind of picked up some of that modeling from him. But when I got to Dallas, I met a woman who really shaped my experience here. And I don't know that I ever fully was able to thank her. But Annette Strauss, who later became mayor, I was working at the Dallas Chamber of Commerce, and I was a nobody from nowhere in that role. And she, for some reason, saw something in me and plucked me up and put me to work in volunteering for the Majestic Theater renovation. And I have no idea why she did it, but I was thrilled. And then that was kind of how I got into the Dallas way, which is if you're in business here, you volunteer here. And she was so impressive. And one last thing about Annette, She always answered her own phone. And that was such a role model for me of someone who, no matter how high she rose, this is Annette Strauss when you called. She was great.
Yep, I remember her as mayor and had a chance to meet her. This comes to mind very quickly. I was at the grocery store, and she was there buying her own groceries. I said, Mayor Strauss,
Isn't that awesome?
what are you doing?
She was just authentic, completely authentic,
Yeah.
and set such an example of I am who I am, but I never forgot a name, never forgot a face, and always was there to give you a hand.
Yeah, she's a great one. That's a great role model. I recently heard a news story about the 50th anniversary of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And even, for just personally speaking, even after that act became law when I was newly divorced, I still couldn't get a credit card or sign a lease without my husband, ex-husband, or father also signing. What are and this will be a very big question, so I kind of apologize for that, but not really. What are the gender equity issues for 2025 as you see them?
Oh, baby. Here we go. Well, let me roll back the clock for a minute to say I share your pain on the, being newly divorced, having put my first husband through law school, and the hilarity that I couldn't get credit, even though I had paid for him to go. It was just cosmic. Then the second example of that was in 1985, when I started my business. I went to the bank, and I legitimately worked and had a track record. And the banker said, well, where's your husband? And I said, you mean the guy I'm divorcing? I don't think he's pertinent here. And he said, well, some male is. And I had to have my dad co-sign the loan that started my company. I was like, good Lord. And that's 1985. So it stayed in practice a long time after the law was passed. Women's rights have been in the balance for many years, but even more so, I fear now. The challenges to reproductive rights, reproductive justice, there were a few bright glimmers when some of the abortion access referendums in various states actually, did roll back some of the egregious policies, pardon my editorializing, that have existed. But protecting the rights of women to govern our own lives and our own bodies is, I think, going to be even more difficult in the coming years, and more important that we rally together to not let go of our rights. It's sometimes tempting to just walk away from the fray, but I don't think we can afford to as women, or as women who owe it to the next generation of women as well. So I see a lot of Sturm and Drang around reproductive justice and reproductive rights, but also around just healthcare access in general. Women in our country, unfortunately, and certainly in our state, have very limited access to health care in many, many, many communities, and that is really exacerbated by poverty, transportation, and all of the conditions that are often acutely affect women more than they do men. And finally, there's pay equity, which, if we will ever be able to resolve that, is a cultural shift that has certainly not happened in my lifetime. And even just, in recent months, we've seen some very well-known figures in our own community step away from positions when they learned what their male peers were being paid and simply say no more. But it's a great act of courage, but it is something that I think ultimately must be done. I had one very favorite conversation with a friend who's at a law firm, and one of their competitor firms had begun publishing the salaries of all the partners, letting it be known. And that was terrifying to this friend of mine, a woman who said our partners would never permit that. She said they would just absolutely never permit it. because they are hiding behind that prohibition. So it's, I think, for all of us over the next, certainly this next year and the years ahead, we can't let up on fighting for the rights to health care, education, reproductive rights, and ultimately to be paid what we are worth.
I have a 24-year-old granddaughter who's a college graduate. She's been out of school for a couple of years now. She works 2 and 3 jobs. She can't afford an apartment. How can I encourage her to give back when she's hardly making it herself?
That is a really difficult situation that young people in their 20s and 30s find themselves in today. They're really not looking at a future that shows them as well off as their parents or grandparents, and very difficult in terms of cost of living. And living in Dallas, Texas, I have 2 sons and a daughter, and my 2 boys both live here, and the cost of living has increased so dramatically for the young man, my son, who's 38 years old, from 10 years ago. I mean, what he has to pay for housing, what he has to pay for everything. It's very, very hard. And I can understand and respect the question that when you are trying to just put ends together, how can you step out and be philanthropic? But I guess the answer that I find to that is because taking yourself out of your own self and your struggles can be the greatest gift you give yourself. And giving to others, whether it is as simple act of, let me give you a ride today, or you're sick, let me bring you something to eat, or can I go to the store for you, is as much philanthropy as writing a check. And it's the act of giving that I think takes us out of our own quagmires. We all live in one to some level. But it takes us out of our own kind of unfortunate part of our place and puts us closer to our purpose. And I think enables us to see, in fact, there are things that I can do, things I can give. And I'm going to quote Ann Curry, who spoke last Friday at Texas Women's Foundation's luncheon, of saying each of us has a purpose and an ability that no one else has. And how can you unlock that? And oftentimes it's through the act of giving that you discover, well, I can do a podcast. I can do whatever. I can do things that I did not think I could do that you discover through the act of giving. I never thought of myself as a leader. My big sister, was a born leader. I mean, just like hit this world running. And because she could run faster and jump higher than almost anybody I ever knew. But so I was kind of in her shadow, and she was a concert pianist at age 11, and so that was kind of daunting. So people would come up and say, "Are you the pianist?" And I'd say, "No," and then they'd turn. And so I never thought that I had any leadership potential or skills when I was growing up. But I got involved in Y Teens at the YWCA, and I don't know, just because I persevered and I liked to get things done and so forth, I ended up president of one of the little, Y Teen clubs. And who knew? Who knew? But anything like that I discovered through my giving experience more than sometimes the other experiences I had.
I think that's a good segue to my next question. What drives you?
Well, I guess I inherited a sense of, responsibility, service, through being the granddaughter of a minister. And then my folks' experience, there was a kind of strong bent toward you should serve others. There's, something to that. But looking at my granddad on Wikipedia, it cracked me up because it was absolutely true. If you look up Joseph Martin Dawson, it says Baptist minister and social justice activist. And I just kind of came from a place of that's not fair. That's not right. What can I do about it? So whether as a kid volunteering for Head Start or, I mean, literally, came to speak Spanish very well, um, for reasons of being in community. So I guess what drives me is that sense of injustice has to be countenanced, and what can I do? And so I'm pretty passionate about that, and particularly around women and girls. So a lot of what I care about and try to work toward is to somehow combat the unfortunate masses of injustices, whether it's racial, gender, that our society permits.
I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and ask you about the Tides Foundation. And then there's a couple of questions following that I think are related about the gender lens investing and then how women are involved in philanthropy. But those are just pieces of that question. I don't expect you to answer just all of that at one time, but that's the way I want to take this part of our conversation.
Well, Tides is an interesting organization. I encountered it through my work at Texas Women's Foundation. I became part of the mothership of the women's funds and foundations in the country and around the world that's called the Women's Funding Network. And ultimately was serving on the board and ultimately chaired that board. And there are about 135 women's funds and foundations in the U.S. and globally. So met a woman who I really liked a lot. She was very involved in the movement around women's philanthropy and women moving money. And so she was on the board of Tides and actually ascending to the role of chair. So I'm like, tell me about Tides. I didn't really know about it because it's kind of an East Coast, West Coast thing. Its headquarters is in San Francisco, but they have properties in New York, but it was really known on the coasts and not particularly in the middle of the country. Yet it had been around since 1975, and it was founded by a progressive activist in San Francisco named Drummond Pike, and was created as a kind of community foundation for folks with a progressive bent. And so one could have a donor-advised fund there. They also do fiscal sponsorship for now today about 175 different emerging nonprofits that then can fly under their C3. And many of them are housed in the facilities that we operate in New York and at the Presidio in San Francisco. So for me, being in Texas and in a state that rebuffs a lot of progressive concepts, politically and otherwise, socially, it was so exciting to be invited to join the board of Tides Network and then serve on the board of Tides Foundation. And so there's three pieces of Tides. The network is the mothership. The foundation is the philanthropic outlay, and about $800 million a year through that channel. And then Tides Center is the fiscal sponsorship operation. And it's fantastic. I mean, over $1 billion annually in revenues and moving hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars out to extremely exciting and effective social justice organizations around the country and some around the world. So it gave me a view of philanthropy at scale. I mean, I've been working as a volunteer or now then at the foundation as an employee, but in this community, principally in North Texas or in South Texas where I grew up. And so to have kind of that bigger view of what does it look like at this level and what does movement building look like when you're working in certain thematic areas, whether it's climate justice or, reproductive rights or healthy democracy kinds of activities, all of that was very exciting. So I am too somewhat sad because I had the privilege of chairing that board for a couple of years, and I'm the immediate past chair for this year, and then I actually term out in November. But it has been a wonderful 7 years of learning and feeling like we were able as an organization to grow and make some very profound differences in a lot of situations in the world. So very important, and it's been a really great experience for me.
How does the phrase gender lens investing fit in with tides, or does it?
Not necessarily, but I would say that the kind of the ESG focus of investing does fit with tides, and certainly tides has moved a good ways toward. It's always had I would say, a responsible portfolio of investments that reflect its values. And really, gender lens investing is just out of that body of work in the finance industry, of people saying, that the owner of the funds, whoever the owner might be, I want my values reflected in my investments. So that had been going on for quite a while, with people saying, I don't want to buy tobacco stocks, or I don't want to buy, so it was a no, not a yes. And I think what was distinctive about the gender lens investing and about the ESG focus in other settings is I want to say yes to investments that benefit women and girls. And I would like my portfolio to reflect benefits, whether it's through investing in companies that have products and services that are female focused and female benefit, whether it's investing directly in women founders, across a whole spectrum of possibilities, but with the ultimate bottom line being somewhere in this mix, women and girls are benefiting either directly as a funder, founder, whatever, or indirectly through the products and services that are being held and delivered. So I guess one of the things I was most proud of at Texas Women's Foundation is that we became the first women's foundation to move our assets into a 100% mission-focused portfolio. There was, I would say, some resistance to that idea early on, because the thought is, well, if you're just helping women and girls with this portfolio, you're going to lose money. Well, no, that's not the point of the portfolio. The point of the portfolio is to have a double bottom line and, to make money through the investment, but to have benefit as well. So when we began that journey, Diana, it was hilarious. There were maybe 5 things you could invest in, like 5 things. Now, ratchet forward 10 years later, there's just a plethora of fabulous things that one can invest in that are screened with a gender lens. But there's still a huge level of inequity in public finance. And as one really good woman who's been in the venture capital kind of space for a long time, I'll quote her to say that in VC funding on any given year, the amount given to women founders is so negligible it could be a rounding error. I mean, it is like under 1%. And so that's a fairly dramatic, reality. And so the other effect of gender lens investing is demonstrating the benefits of this portfolio, which we made money. We did not lose a dime. We made money with a mission-focused, benefiting women and girls portfolio. So it proves, again, that this is a valid investing strategy, and it is. So that in itself helps shift the market and its perceptions. So what began with folks investing around climate environment, now evolves into gender lens, and you have that movement that's really very positive.
So the Texas Women's Foundation, which started out as the Dallas Women's Foundation, was, I'm assuming, a leader in the arena of women in philanthropy. What is the next chapter of that, or the next phase of a women in philanthropy? What role are we playing now and in the future?
The women's philanthropy movement kind of got going in 1975 when Gloria Steinem created the Ms. Foundation. And the idea was, women control an awful lot of money. We make most of the consumer purchasing decisions, like 80%. We make most of the healthcare decisions, like 72%. I mean, we control a lot of money, but women traditionally had never thought of themselves in the same way as philanthropic. And men are wonderfully philanthropic in the traditional model of philanthropy, but tend toward bricks and mortar, where women have been engaged in philanthropy since we were in the caves. But we did so through a different kind of giving. Women tend to be more hands-on, more personally involved, volunteering with the organizations, truly touching the work in a different way. And it was sort of thought, well, that's enough. But as women began to ascend either through inherited wealth, who the founders of the women's funding movement, Gloria Steinem herself made the money, but many of the other founders were inherited wealth, second generation, third generation women who suddenly were like, well, what am I going to do with all of this? and began to realize that they could do so much more than they had been doing. So the founder, one of the founders of Texas Women's Foundation and the New York Women's Foundation, Helen Kelly Hunt, was one of the first women to, and she and her sister Swanee were the two of the first women to say we should organize around this, and creating women's funds and foundations in New York, Colorado, Dallas, and so they spread and created the Women's Funding Network to support it. Fast forward to today, you have women's funds and foundations in many, many places in the world doing what they've always done, which is raising money from the community, raising money from one another, pooling it, and then giving it in grants to organizations benefiting women and girls. That's great, but it's not big enough. So if you add up all the dollars, that women's philanthropy pushes out into the world, it's still a pittance compared to overall philanthropy. So women and girls organizations in any given year secure approximately 2% of all the philanthropic dollars. 2. And men and boys, 22. So it is an ongoing challenge to secure sufficient funding to support things exclusively for women and girls. Now, education, yes, covers both sides, and all of that, that's great. But so women's role in philanthropy, I guess I would say, needs a big step up. And I'm delighted to see that Melinda Gates and Mackenzie Scott are showing how that happens. There's a grant that Melinda Gates gave to the Women's Funding Network specifically designed to help the women's funds look at ways to raise more money. And one thing they're turning to is gender lens investing. And so, because it's all threaded together in a really, in a true way, is that philanthropy is just one end of the spectrum from investment. This one you give the money away, this one you're seeking a return, but it's just one end of the spectrum. So the role of women today, women are earning more money despite the gender, wage gap. We're earning more money. We have control of more money. We have control of more buying decisions. So I think we have to get a lot more brave and give bigger. This is why the Hunt sisters came up with the idea of women moving millions, which was to incent women donors across the country where women donors are organized. I mean, they exist in women donor networks, they exist in women's funds, they exist in, junior league, they exist in a whole lot of charitable enterprises. But no one had ever challenged women to think about giving $1 million or more to women and girls. And that was revolutionary. So I'll quote my predecessor at then Dallas Women's Foundation, who said that was an absolute turning point in the life of that organization, and allowed her board and Becky herself to say, we're going to do a campaign and we're going to raise $35 million. Wasn't a single women's fund in the country that had done that over a 5-year period. None. With the success of that, when I came in, we said, well, why not make it 50? And we raised 52, and so, and we could do that because women had suddenly seen that they had the power and the resources to make big commitments and follow their passions and benefit the organizations they felt most passionate about. So the future of women in philanthropy, we're kind of at the heart of it. What we do, how we operate, where we go. And so it's just, we have to go bigger.
I'm assuming with this next question that you have access to some research maybe that I haven't seen or maybe that I haven't paid attention to. But what motivates young women to become involved, to volunteer, and to donate financially to nonprofit organizations?
I think there's a strong thread that runs through every young women's-based organization I have been exposed to, of the desire for community. We take a lot of flack out in the world. It's just true. Women have to be concerned for their safety. We are not as free to move around as we wish we were. There are a lot of challenges that young women face in their careers, in their lives, in their circumstances. And the desire to have a supportive, safe community in which you can gather around a central cause that you all believe in, that to me is at the heart of why young women join different organizations and support them. And we've certainly seen it. And then kind of like my story early on, in those environments, you can learn leadership skills. Working on a committee or organizing a project for, name that tune, junior league or whomever, you learn leadership skills that then can be transferred into your career in ways that are totally legitimate, and yet you learned it in a safe environment. So I think that bond of community is really strong. So we saw this at Texas Women's. We started 2 initiatives. One was part of a national group of women's funds that came together to support young women of color, ages 16 to 24, and to support them in their journey in life in the largest possible sense, as advocates for their own well-being and as advocates within their community. And ultimately, if they chose to go to school or they chose to start a business, as either an entrepreneur or a student. And the young women that were part of that program continued to be together. I mean, they forged a very tangible community that continues to be supportive of one another years and years and years later. And so I just saw lots and lots of proof that it is the being in community with like-minded women that is a safe and supportive place to be, is a big driver.
What are the trends that you're seeing in philanthropy and the nonprofit sector?
A couple of things, Diana, I think are really a lot of people are talking about, and one of them is the very marked difference in now sometimes it's third or fourth generation inherited wealth that is just basically walking away from the traditional giving that their grandparents, great grandparents, or parents were involved in. So this is being felt somewhat acutely by many in the arts, where, it was kind of a de rigueur, you would always give to the arts, and, de rigueur, you would always. One of the funniest statements I ever heard, was that my husband had done a paper on the use of art as a financial tool. And so he was speaking at this conference, and this wonderful woman who was a cultural historian slash finance person said, well, the arts are for old women. And I was like, well, that's pretty harsh. But at a certain level, there was a kind of graying of the supporters for arts organizations that now startup young arts organizations, that's different. But the traditional old line institutions are seeing a real change. And I don't think that trend's going to reverse. I think it has made some institutions change themselves. And I'll point to Kim Noltemy's extraordinary leadership at the Dallas Symphony when she was here, and what she will do in L.A. of democratizing and decolonizing the symphony. And that's what I think will have to happen with those institutions to attract that younger set of donors. Another trend within that population is, and I guess I have three of them that are part of my life, right, with my kids, but they very much see social enterprises as an outlet for philanthropy, as well as nonprofits, pure nonprofits. So a social enterprise that is intending to do good but make money is as appealing, if not more so, than the pure giving to charity motivation of a nonprofit, barring a personal interest in the cause of the nonprofit. So if the young donor is saying, but I'm really passionate about saving girls from trafficking, or for whatever the motivation is, that can overcome that bias toward social enterprises. But I see in a lot of the young donors that I've talked to and met and worked with, that those are in some ways now interchangeable. And that's a very different orientation and could be and implications to the nonprofit, pure nonprofit community.
So just to maybe help clarify what social enterprise means in this context, to me, it means the Salvation Army thrift store.
Yes, yeah, it's sort of, yes.
Yeah, sort of.
It is. But
you're taking that to another generation of
to another
enterprise.
Generation of social enterprises, where in fact, it is an enterprise designed to make money and do social good. And so it's the same model, but it's not just a thrift store. It's like we may be building I think there's this wonderful group that I give a modest investment to, that invests in women founders. And these are all social enterprises that show a direct and demonstrable benefit for women. But they might be like a supportive mechanism for seniors living alone that you buy. that they have a profit, and the investors will receive a good portion of that profit, over time. But the driver is not just take in donated goods and pass them back out at a discount, but actually creating very novel solutions to social problems and selling them. and, and I love it.
So you said something that I want to talk about just a little bit before we get back to the real questions I want to ask you. But you mentioned your investment in this group. And so we're working with a lot of different clients now. I'm here and their donors. It's like investment and donation are becoming kind of interchangeable.
They are.
And they're so different.
And they are so different. But yes, because we very deliberately used the term investment in securing donations for the Texas Women's Foundation. Your investment in us will benefit these and so it is in one sense a turn of phrase now. It is a manner of speaking, but in practical fact, where I invest assets for a return is different than where I invest assets for a charitable purpose and expect no return. And those, they're very different. Mm-hmm. So this over here is in fact a contribution or a donation, but those terms kind of got out of favor in the sense that, well, in some ways they sound patronizing, like, they sound like you're sort of patronizing. I'm donating to you because you don't have and I do, or whatever. It's kind of a, ew.
Well, but that's true.
It's true. Of course,
charity.
It's true.
We're talking about charity.
We're talking about charity. But I guess it just smacked of a certain sense that caused a lot of us, and I certainly liberally used the term in both connotations, when I was fundraising. So forgive me.
I just think it's curious how words not drift, but shift into other meanings that are like, no, that's not what that means. Anyway, I just find that really interesting.
That's absolutely accurate.
Yeah. So a couple of more questions that I wanted to ask you. So what are your goals now? You've accomplished a heck of a lot. And as I said earlier, I think you've impacted the lives of a lot of people directly and indirectly even more. But so I don't even mean but. It's like now.
Now what?
Now what? Now what?
Yeah.
You don't stop.
I'm asking myself that on a daily basis. I acutely failed retirement. I just solidly failed. And as my sweet husband reminded me, so I first threw myself into like what became another full-time job and an assignment that just took on a life of its own. And that was year one, and I decided, oh, no, can't do that. So year two, I sort of parsed it out into, I had two great big assignments but they were time-bounded. And then I was like, well, that's fine. You can just, do these little projects or whatever. But what really lights me up is that if I have any talents or skills that I can align with a mission that I care about, then I don't care if I get paid or not now. I have enough. I'm happy. And so it's really the effort of helping things that our community so desperately needs. And so I kind of got really lit up by being asked to help with MetroCare and the creation of this beautiful new facility that Dallas's public mental health system deserves, and all the people that are served there deserve. And it's about time we invested in the mental health of this community. So I'm really pumped up about getting to serve that endeavor, and so I guess certain things like that just sort of light me up, and I'm like, okay, let's do that. And then I'm still looking for what's next, I don't really know. I'd be happy to say I had an answer, but I don't. Not yet.
Well, I like that because I think we don't know. We certainly don't know what our future is. And one of the things that I've experienced and learned these last few years is, life goes on and things continue. I mean, you say retirement. I was like, what the heck does that mean? I'm not going to go sit on the beach. I don't like the beach anyway. And there's work to do.
Right.
And I think I don't see a time that I'm not going to be working. And that, to me, that is like doing what it is that I want to do. It's like I have to be involved in something, accomplishing something, trying to achieve something. This podcast is an example of, it's like just one day, I'll do a podcast and gather the people around me to help make that happen. It wasn't like I could just sit down and put a mic in front of my face and do it, but not restricting myself just because I don't know. There's plenty of people out there who do know.
Yes.
And who are willing to help. That was like an epiphany to realize that there are people who can help you with whatever crazy idea you might have. So that's something that I hope people who might be listening to this will say, oh, I may not know how to do this, but I want to do something. Let me just find the people who can support me to make that happen.
Exactly. And I think it all boils down to, feeling that you have purpose. And, that purpose-driven life phrase is hackneyed, but it's really true, is that what gets you up in the morning is exactly that, having a sense that what I do counts today. It matters to somebody. I kind of get lit up on that.
So one thing that I do with all of my guests at the end of our conversation is to ask them, what is the one thing you want our listeners to remember from our conversation?
I thought about this, and I decided I would say this, that the courage people have is not always visible. And you may see someone and think they're not courageous. They just are walking down the street. They got up and went to work. But you don't ever know what really goes on in the lives of people and the courage that it may take to get out of bed and get up and go to work. And so I think the one lesson that I have learned through the work that I've done and the things that I've been blessed to be exposed to is take nothing for granted. Take nothing for granted that your observation is always accurate. It isn't. And that the lady standing next to you may be the most courageous person you ever met.
Thank you, Roslyn. I so love having you here as my guest today.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you.
Thank you.